wax polish, a really useful product to keep in your workshop. And in this video I will share how do you make it, how do you use it, what's worth considering. Hi, my name is Linn and this is the Darbin Orvar channel, and for the past, 7 years or so, I have been making wax polish in my workshop that I have been selling and shipping all over the world. And today I'm going to share the things that I have learned and gathered over these years of making so much wax polish. Now, before we begin, let's identify what we're making. So I prefer wax polish made with only wax and oil. I don't use mineral spirits, turpentines, coloring agents, anything like that. I like a natural and safe and effective product, which this is. I love the idea of keeping wax polish in a small wooden box accessible in the shop, so I currently have a couple of specially made wax pots listed for sale if you're interested. They're filled with mineral oil polish and also come with an extra tin on the side to refill. Anyway, these make a great Christmas gift if you are looking for something special, for yourself or the maker in your life or the cook, as this is great for kitchen equipment too. Now, the first thing to think about is wax. I like pure beeswax, and you can find it at apiaries locally. You can also find it at like Amazon, sometimes hardware stores have it. Of course, if you're lucky enough to have your own bees, or a friend who has bees, then you can always render some wax yourself and get a really great product to start off with. If you buy it commercially, it sometimes comes in the form of pellets. And if you buy it from a local farm, you might get a block. Now, the pellets are practical, especially if you're not making a huge batch, because then you can measure out exactly how much you need by weight or volume, and you don't have to melt a lot of wax down, which is often the case with a block. We keep a slow cooker in the shop that's designated for wax polish use only. I usually turn it on in the morning when I want to make finish, and a couple of hours later it's ready to go and the whole cooker is filled with melted wax. Right now, I'm going to make some tung oil polish. The great thing about the days that we make wax polish is that it makes the whole shop smell really great. This is easier for us because we tend to make quite a lot, and it works out well to measure out the liquid wax and the liquid oil by volume. However, if you're making a small amount, I would just measure out how much wax you need and then slowly heat it with the oil. You want to heat it in a double boiler. You don't want to put this directly on the stove. A nice gentle heat is best. If you don't have a bowl to use, I've seen some people use an old metal can, like a soup can or something, that's clean, and then that they put the oil and the wax in and then put that in a pot of simmering water. So you can just use what you have. Now, let's talk proportion. This will determine how stiff or how loose your polish will be. And for some things you may want a firmer wax, and for other things you may want like a softer. So it kind of depends. The proportions that I use is what I have kind of fiddled around with and play with and realized over time that this is what I like. However, you may prefer something a little different. So I make 3 different kinds of wax polish: raw linseed oil, 100% tung oil, and food-grade mineral oil. And the different oils that you use will determine the proportions of the wax, at least for these oils. For linseed oil and tung oil, I use about 1 cup of wax to 4 cups of oil by volume. For the mineral oil, I increase the ratio of wax slightly in order to get the same consistency. Sometimes I change this up a little bit depending on the season. If it's really hot and in the middle of the summer, I might increase the ratio of the wax because I don't want to deliver like a soft kind of melted product, and temperature will definitely affect this. Now, in terms of method, it is pretty straightforward. You basically combine wax and oil. You want to make sure that they are both warm, that the wax is melted, and that they have time to properly combine. You want to make sure your equipment is clean, but if you have designated wax equipment like I do here, it's okay if there is some wax residue on it, as it will just melt back into the blends. Once the wax has combined thoroughly with the oil, I pour it into tins. I like to fill this up as high to the top as is reasonable without it falling out. Although you can use, you know, mason jars or any kind of thing that has a lid, that so you can close it and it's easy enough to scoop out of. Make sure you don't close the lid because you want to leave some room for steam to vent until the wax polish is set and absolutely cool. Let's move on to actually using this stuff. When do you use wax polish? Well, wax polish is a woodworking finish that is usually applied as a final coat on a project to provide a very unique softness and also additional protection. Now, wax polish will wear off over time, that's just the nature of it. So it's not something that you apply once and never again. I mean, depending on the application, I like to reapply it on things, I don't know, every couple of months. In terms of material, I mostly use the polish on wood, on metal, and occasionally on leather too, to add some protection and also darken the leather a touch. So you may wonder, why do I make 3 different kinds? Well, the different oils have different properties, and so I use different kinds for different things. So let's start with the linseed oil polish. This is my go-to workshop polish, I guess you can say. This is what I use on all of my tool handles, any projects for the workshop. It's just kind of my basic go-to wax polish. I use raw linseed oil, which means that there are no metal dryers in there, so it will dry rather slowly and it won't really cure completely. That's my basic one that I use for a lot of different things. Now, tung oil. I love tung oil. Tung oil has some really amazing properties. It's a really old oil from China. This is tung oil. It has a very particular scent. Now, I really love it. Not everybody does, but most people like it. More people are familiar with the linseed oil smell because, you know, you use it a lot in the shop. Tung oil, I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It's very kind of woodsy. It cures a little bit harder than linseed, and if you don't use your wax for a long time, a thin film will develop on top of the polish in the can. Actually, it can develop on the linseed oil as well, it just takes a lot longer. But this is actually what you want to see. This is what creates kind of a protection, like a film on top of the project as well. So when that happens, you know that that's what you want to see. However, if that happens on your tin, you can just kind of peel off that dried polish and then, you know, use the stuff underneath. Or you can actually use the dry stuff if you want to like work it into the wood. That works too. This is my go-to polish for any tabletop, any surface that I want to protect. Any kind of nicer wood, anything that I really want to add some nice protection. Tung oil does make the wood a little bit darker right off the bat compared to linseed oil. However, it doesn't continuously darken over time. Mineral oil. Okay, this one's a little bit different. So I use food grade mineral oil, and mineral oil is unique in the sense that it doesn't cure at all. It stays wet, which is exactly what you want when it comes to protecting like metal surface from rust. So this is what I put on all of my shop tools, my table saw, my bandsaw table, my chisels, my saws. Whenever I want things to kind of glide, and like if you put jigs on your table saw underneath, on the runners, I put this stuff. It's a really great shop protection product. And then I also use it for any food-related projects that I work on. So any cutting boards, spoons, butter knives, that kind of thing. So, how do you apply wax polish? I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can simply use a paper towel or a shop rag. If you want to create a smoother surface, then I recommend using like some fine steel wool or even some fine sandpaper. In fact, if you are looking for sanding and finishing in one step, you can use wax polish and sandpaper to do like a wet sanding, which you only want to do this on projects where you're not going to use a different kind of finish first. So only if you're planning on just finishing it with wax polish anyway. But then you scoop out some wax polish with your sandpaper and you kind of sand and finish at the same time. And you get a really smooth surface that way. This is nice to do if you're inside and you don't want to have any dust in the air, and you want to avoid having too many steps at the end of your project. How should the surface be prepared ahead of time? Well, it kind of depends. That's what I really like about wax polish. It is such a versatile product. You can put it directly on raw wood if you want, works great for that. Just make sure you realize that the wood will soak up the oil and the wax, and you may have kind of dry spots develop as some parts of the wood is more thirsty than other spots. So you want to just like reapply a couple coats, and then you might want to reapply a little bit more frequently after this point too than you normally would. You can also apply wax polish on top of any other cured, dried finish, and this is what I usually do for my projects. So if I finish a project with polyurethane or lacquer or something like that, even like epoxy, once I have finished all those layers, whatever I want to do, if I have stained, I want to do that ahead of time too. Once I get it to the point where I like it, it's done, more or less. That's when I add a final coat of wax polish, sometimes with a really fine, steel wool or sandpaper. And this is kind of to clean up the surface. You remove any of those like fine little bumps that might appear in the finish. You also get it like extra smooth. And you may not know what I'm talking about if you've never worked with wax, but wax really creates like a very, very interesting, soft, kind of matte smoothness. It is really nice. My favorite combination that I often use on projects is to first finish with de-waxed shellac. It's natural and it doesn't smell too bad, it dries really quickly. Once I have applied 1 or 2 coats of that, that's when I put on my wax polish. And that's kind of my go-to finish that I use a lot. Now you may wonder, how long will my wax polish in the jar last? Like, will it go bad? And this really depends on what oil you're using. If you're using an oil, for example, that can go rancid, like if some people like to use like a walnut oil, that can go rancid, then the whole product is going to go rancid. If you use mineral oil, for example, it doesn't cure, so it stays kind of wet, which means that it will stay good like indefinitely. I mean, beeswax on its own never goes bad. If you use linseed oil or tung oil, it will cure. So over time you will have that film develop on the top of the can. Not bad, but you still have to peel it off, and eventually, if you just let it sit on the shelf for years and years, it will dry up. And that's just the nature of the product. I hope you found this helpful, useful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. If you make your own wax polish, I'd love to hear about it. If you don't want to make a wax polish, but you'd like to pick up one of ours from the shop, I'll put a link in the description below. Currently, we still have a couple of our wax pots available too, which is a special little wooden jar filled with wax polish, with mineral oil wax polish too. But there's not too many of those left. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.